Life is unproblematical. Life is sentimental, lyrical. In the poetry of Matthew Arnold, in the poetry of, for example, the Hounds of Spring, Thompson, for example, even in Hopkins, for example, there is broad agreement that the decorum has to be maintained, beauty has to be presented. It is the duty of the poet to uphold beauty. Anything unchaste, anything below the navel, anything ugly, anything higgledy-piggledy, anything disheveled, anything disconcerting must not be presented in literature unless pruned, unless acculturated properly and sensitized. Now, life was not allowing this sanitized version of life reflecting itself in the minds of the people, because people were suffering from real existential pangs. Life was becoming really problematic. Women were, being abandoned. And the church, Catholic Church, and the Protestant Church were posing up problems of belief in terms of, and there were questions being posed. Sentimental, Thomas Hardy was turning closer towards atheism, and darkness and dark spells and pessimism was taking sway in the poetry of, for example, a woman writer who is questioning George Meredith.
I request everyone to kindly switch off their microphones, please.
Yes, somebody
All the
shouting.
participants,
Yeah,
please.
right. So naturally, George Meredith, to come back to my point, is difficult.
I request
The
everyone to
ambassadors
kindly switch off their
actually
microphones,
bring
please.
real psychological
All the
realism.
participants,
It is not just mimetic or descriptive. The purpose is not
please.
to tell a story from the outside. So naturally, George Meredith, to come back to my point, is difficult. The ambassadors
Kindly switch off their
actually
microphones,
bring
please.
real psychological
All the
realism.
participants,
It is not just mimetic or descriptive. The First World War was not on the scene. Tell a story the from the outside. Vestiges of so this, naturally, George Meredith, to come back to my point, problematize the ambassadors actually bring
please.
real
All
psychological
the
realism.
participants,
It is not just that was the mimetic or descriptive. The First World War was not on the scene. Tell a story from the outside. So naturally, George Meredith, to come back to my point, problematize the ambassadors actually
please.
psychological
All the
realism.
participants,
It is not just mimetic. It was Ezra Pound, that American kind of dissatisfied American, what should I say, the gypsy, the perennial gypsy, the vagrant American kind of dissatisfied American, what should I say, vision of life. He wanted to find out the truth of life, and he was touring across the gypsy, the vagrant American kind of dissatisfied American. He remained in England for 12 years. What should I say, vision of life. He wanted to live in England the gypsy, and he was touring across the gypsy, the vagrant American kind of dissatisfied American. What is it? What should I say? Imagism is he wanted to live in England. He and the gypsy and friends touring across the gypsy, the vagrant American kind of this image he was touring. What is it? And what should I say? Imagism is he wanted to live in England. He and the gypsy. You want to tell something? Tell it straight with Greek precision. He was a lover of the ancient classics. So he was a student of Euripides. He says, go straight for the image. And he picked it up, like T.S. Eliot, he picked it up from the French symbolists. because he was widely read in French. He picked it up from the poetry of Baudelaire, the symbolist, from the writings of Mallarmé, of Verlaine, for example, and there are many another. The French people, they were so disillusioned with the French gardening, the settled stereotypical French tradition of poetry, that they reacted against the fin d'un siècle, the failure of the century, which wrote too sweetly, and they were rebelling against it. Now, this symbolism also took the shape of Impressionism. That what is Impressionism? You speak of your total impression. Do not go for the discrete parts. You try to recollect and redraw the entire image out of your own impression. And the impression is remembered as a light. So the Impressionists are who definitely emphasize the appeal of light. It is as if a figure emerging out of light. That is Impressionist attitude, done in painting mainly, but also reflected in poetry. For example, in the poetry of Baudelaire, in the poetry of Mallarmé, in varying degrees. In the definitely in the poetry of, for example, uh, what is Duartin, for example, Edouard Duartin, Edouard Duardin, Edouard Duardin, Boubou de Montparnasse, the French poem Boubou de Montparnasse, Boubou de Montparnasse, Boubou de Montparnasse, Boubou de Montparnasse. These are poems that Shelley to the west wind. No, that is ontologically a matter of the past. The 20th century human being is no longer ontologically the same as the pastoral, pre industrialist, undivided character of a man. We now know that we are subconscious, half conscious, conscious. We know that at our primal level there is a thing like id to the west wind. We know that we are not the same man, one that man. Is ontologically so the indivisibility a matter of the personality. The 20th century human being is no longer reflected in the ontologically the same as the pastoral, reflected in the novels of industrialist, undivided character of a man. Reflected in the novels of that we are subconscious, half-conscious, conscious. In Orlando, we know, for example, that at our primal level, there is a thing like Orlando to the west wind. We know so many that we are not the same man, one that man. Is ontologically in Mrs. Dalloway, matter of the personality. The 20th century human being is no longer in the ontologically the same as the pastoral, reflected in the novels of definitely these theories. They're conscious. We know, for example, at our primal level, there is a thing like to the west wind. We know and that we are not the same man. Do for the writers so the indivisibility is a matter of the personality. The 20th century human being. But that doesn't mean that modernist poetry is all about pessimism. Modernist poetry, modernist literature says we do not fight shy of embracing, interpolating, questioning the problems of the age. We must drive through the problems of the age. We must suffer like Christ. The poet is still a hero. The writer is still a hero. That is the difference between the postmodernist and modernist attitude. In postmodernity, the herohood of the writer, the personality of the writer is already disappeared. It is a collage of meanings, montage of scenes. Truth is multiple. Truth that is cannot be attained. But in modernist attitude, in modernist writing, modernist vision, truth is one. You have to get hold of it. Is structurally disappear. So modernist poetry also, or modernist literature is also very friendly to the structuralist assumptions. New critics, for example, John Ransom Crowe, for example, Alan Tate, for example, William Shatner, Glenn Brooks, they all one. You have and their father, for example, I.A. Richards, they all believe that there is a meaning in writing. There is an available, variable, achievable meaning. New critics, for example, meaning has to be negotiated, not using the Victorian kind of two-dimensional attitude, telling the story descriptively. It has to be three-dimensional. You have to question the issue, the points at issue, like with the attitude of a historian, with the attitude of a scholar, with the attitude of a celebrated, intellectually conscious, self-conscious discoverer. I think telling the story descriptively. I have tried, beyond that I can't do. Anyway, so Pound says issue age is complex. Our present 20th century age is complex. And less is more. We must not put in intellectually conscious with inessential things. We must be speaking sense and compare be economic, not sloppy, but absolutely neat, natty, and intact. And I quote him, the age demanded an image of its accelerated grimace. Society is grimacing each other. Yes, the world was shooting away to the world war. Inessential things. The age demanded an image of its accelerated grimace, something for the modern stage, not at any rate an active grace. No, I quote him. Don't have to write beautiful things. You have to address the rotten, the problematic, the stinking, the unsavory. Yes, and that was how the Images poems are very economic. I quote one poem from Hilda Doolittle, Iliad, any rate. Iliad is a pastiche, Iliad. Isn't it? And Orestes, you have to address sea, sea meaning the ocean, the stinking, sea, the unsavory, your pointed pine. That was how the Images poems splash your grapevines on our rocks. One poem from hurl your green over us and cover us with pools of oh my goodness, it almost sounds like riddles. See, it is so economic. Splashing of the waves. That's how the entire poem is actually giving. It is not just a metaphor. The entire poem is attesting to the unrest of the mind, the unrest of the society, or whatever, a given scene. That's how a newer way of arriving at meaning is attempted. Or, for example, the Japanese haiku, which was very compacted, absolutely, what should I say? Absolutely giving, absolutely tawny, niggardly, compressed, attesting to it is laconic to the point of being Riglish. In a station of the metro, that is the name of the poem. A newer way of arriving at meaning is pound rights. Just two lines, that's a poem. The apparition is a which was very unreal shadow, a ghost. The apparition of these faces in the crowd. He is in a station in New York or some metro station. Compressed metro, not in our. It is tube railway set to the point of capital English. In a station in the capital of the metro. In a station of the metro. The two lines are the apparition of these faces in the crowd. Just two lines. Petals on a wet black bough. These faces, this jostling crowd, so many faces. What do they look like? They look like so many in the crowd. He is in another station in New York or some metro station. Not very fresh. Metro not in our because they were sweating, they were perspiring. Petals on a wet black bough. The bough is not very fresh. It is already blackish. And the petals, there are so many petals. These faces are like petals and they are not living men. They are like apparitions. Now, this gives us the actual essence of modernistic ethos of image of modern living. Your poetry has to be like in wasteland. The entire world is shown as our ways, put on ways. There are so many petals. These faces are like parodying and pastiching many types of many genres of poetry, epic, lyric, ballads, etc. T.S. Eliot is using them in the wasteland because in tradition and individual talent, T.S. Eliot says The modernist poet must not write out of the vacuum. He must historically study the history, the past, the tradition, and refine, distill them through his individual talent, and he specified them and reused them. So definitely, the metaphysical poets in T.S. Eliot thought were the real poets because they went for a united sensibility on concordia concourse, not just sentimentally writing discordia concourse, or where dissociation of sensibility takes place. So in a way, modernist poetry goes back to the best poetry of the romantics also, where you need to conjoin your brain and your heart. For example, to read John Keats's Nightingale and Mission Art. So it is not just sentimental swaying of your head that will do the meaning, or ode on melancholy. You have to be very deeply metaphysical to follow it, isn't it? Or Paul Ridge's poem, for example, Rejection and Ode. You have to be metaphysical. You have to be critical, for example, to understand what it means. So in a way, the modernist poets were writing, for example, Gerontius, the old man looks back to the past, and also speaks of a rebirth. In Marina, the later part of these poets, W.B. Yeats and T.S. Eliot and the others also, they became constructive more and more. They just didn't see the pessimistic side. In Ashwin's, they put quotations. In Mother in the Cathedral, for example, the attitude and speaks the image building are all modernistical. But the modernist poets are now putting a way out of the others also, a way out of the unfair or constructive. So modernist poetry is not just weighing the vulgar, weighing the cathedral, trivial, weighing the dusty, the pedestrian. It is actually a pedagogical weighing of the pedestrian in search of the sublime. T.S. Eliot was looking for the sublime when he was referring to what is it? Apollo and the frog, that great binary of the image. Rabindranath Tagore pointed out that even when Eliot was speaking of the stalactites and stalagmites and the frog, he was saying that a gentle, noble day will take us to Apollo. So modernist poetry, which continues through the modernist world poetry of, for example, in a newer sense. No? They call themselves anti-modern, but they could not shed some of the preoccupations with pessimism, self-query, etc. In the poems of Tomlinson, for example, in the poems of Hopkins, for example, in the poems of Seamus Heaney, for example, although they are anti-traditional, trying to become anti-T.S. Eliot, the quality of being new and questioning the world and trying to look for a timely medium is still carrying on. In American poetry also, William Carlos Williams, Bo Away, the lost generation novelists, for example, Judith Strastein, Fitzgerald, they were also bringing in this self-questioning new attitude to the world. For example, in Sound and Fury, you will find still a very modernist kind of arms for defining our existence. Thank you. I have done. I have got, for example, serious meeting with Judith Strastein, Fitzgerald, where the VC selection committee will be there. I have to be there. So thank you very much. I have spoken a little way too the word. For example, given more time, I could have sourced out. I had still tensions on coming across James Joyce's Ulysses. Ulysses is definitely one word. Ulysses is the modern, epistemically the representative of the modern 20th century hero who has lost his path, who is looking for way and stream of consciousness technique, as in Virginia Woolf, so in James Joyce. The stream of consciousness technique is actually giving us the third dimension, the look into our inner being. Okay, Ulysses is the Victorian is the modern, epistemically the representative of the modern 20th century hero who has lost his path, who is looking for way
and
and stream of
delivering your
consciousness
lecture,
technique, as in
which we have
Virginia Woolf,
enlightened us.
so in James Joyce.
Now,
The
if
stream of
there are any
consciousness technique
questions,
is actually
candidates,
giving us
you can
the third
proceed.
dimension.
Participants are requested if
Look
they have
into
any
our
questions.
inner being. Okay, Ulysses is the Victorian is the modern, epistemically the representative of the
Dvipayan
modern
Mitro has put us the question. In modern literature, we have seen that many writers are turning to the East for solace. Uh, My question is, why are so many modern writers preoccupied with the East for salvation?
Right. Now that takes us into a very entirely different continent of discussion. Anyway, Eliot and others, they were proposing that we have become very insulated, insular.
Modern
We
literature
have
has
become a
seen that many
small pool.
writers are turning to the
English
East for
sensibility, English
salvation.
world, English vision, in fact, our
My
Western
question
world
is, why are so
needs
many
to
modern
broaden
writers
its vision.
preoccupied with the
So
East
we
for
have to be
salvation?
scholarly. We have to go to Jehovah, to the Jews. We have to go to ancient Greek classical wisdom. We have to go to India. We have to go to China and Japan. Ezra Pound was picking up haiku systems, and Japanese no play, NOH play, and T.S. Eliot was coming to Buddhism and Upanishad. They were looking for real new arsenals, new inspirational saps, and this they were indebted for to Walt Whitman and Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the two great Americans, and Walden, and Thoreau. They were actually the transcendentalists of America who really initiated this process. So what T.S. Eliot was doing is not new. He is actually, without accepting perhaps consciously that he is indebted, he is rechannelizing much of Whitman into his poetic ethics, poetic precepts, and poetic practice. Okay. But Dvaipayan, we
Thank you,
shall
sir.
sit down together later and over 2 cups of coffee, and we will differ.
And sir, another question has come up. Ikshita Dev is asking, how does modernism look at nature? I think
Right.
that's mentioned. Yes.
This is also a real googly. Anyway, Ikshita, let me try. This nature is no longer damn nature. The the the
And sir,
Christian
another
attitude to damn
question has
nature,
come up.
which already fell to pieces
Ikshita
with the
Dev is
industrial
asking, how does
revolution
modernism look
taking
at
place with
nature?
Newton and the entire the line of scientists coming over and Darwin's kind of species theory of species, etc. Evolution of species. They were already falling apart. Now, the modernist poets and modernist novelists were not interested in nature per se. The outward extrinsic nature has not been attended to in a great way. For example, in Conrad, yes. In Nostromo, we found. In Heart of Darkness, we found. But the real mainstay of query is man. The exploitation, for example, if I am kind of uh, says, speaking correctly, I think the Coutts's spasms, Marlowe's spasms, they are what matter. For example, in Nostromo, for example, what is it? That fancied land, the Costa Guana, where Nostromo is watching the exploitation and the mining of silver and gold, etc. And Mr. Gold. It is not nature per se, but it is human nature in nature. The modern, post-industrial world, where definitely nature is getting devastated. Definitely, some modernist items. Yes, D.H. Lawrence is an aboriginalist who, in the plumed serpent, for example, and in other novels also, is giving fresh looks at nature. But nature, from the point of view of psychopathology too. It is man's sex because modernism tries to reorient our attitude to sex. In Tiresias, for example, in the wasteland, Tiresias is a bisexual, is an aboriginalist who, in the plumed serpent, for example, and in other novels also, is giving fresh looks at nature. But nature, from the point of view of psychopathology too. It is man's sex because modernism tries to reorient our attitude to sex. In Tiresias, for example, in the wasteland, Tiresias is a bisexual, is an aboriginalist who, in the plumed serpent, for example, and in other novels also, is giving fresh looks at nature. But nature, from the point of view of psychopathology too. It is man's sex because modernism tries to reorient our attitude to sex. In Tiresias, for example, in the wasteland, Tiresias is a bisexual, is an aboriginalist who, in the plumed serpent, for example, and in other novels also, is giving fresh looks at nature. But nature from the point of view of psychopathology too. It is man's sex because modernism tries to reorient our attitude to sex. In Tiresias, for example, in the Westland, Tiresias is a bisexual. Even aboriginally,
Hello, Dr. Pushmita.
the plume serpent, for example, and in other novels also, is giving fresh look to
Hello,
nature. But nature, from the point
Dr.
of view of
Pushmita, can you hear me?
psychopathology too. It is man's sex because modernism tries to reorient our attitude to sex. In
Pushmita.
Tiresias, for example, in the
Hello,
Westland,
sir.
Tiresias is a bisexual.
Olka.
I think she
Hello,
has been
Dr. Pushmita.
disconnected, and our speaker, sir, also has been disconnected. I think
Hello,
now we should go for
Dr.
a break,
Pushmita, can you
and
hear
we'll
me?
start our next session from 1 p.m.
So everyone is requested to join once again at 12:30 or 12:45. 40. Pushmita.
12:45, as it is,
Uh,
as our speaker, sir, will
Olka.
join at 1 p.m. So it's better that we'll join at 12:45. Also has been
So
disconnected.
we
I think
sincerely apologize everyone
now
because
we should
because
go
of
for a
the
break,
engagement
and
of
we'll start our next
Professor
session from 1 p.m.
Murtuja. He will be available only at 1 p.m. So everyone is requested. So I request everyone to join once again at 12:30 or 12
12:45, as it is,
by 12:40.
as our speaker, sir,
So
will
thank you
join
very
at
much.
1 p.m. So it's better that we'll
Yeah,
join
unfortunately,
at
CB sir also
12:45.
got disconnected.
So we
So that is
sincerely
why
apologize
we
everyone
could not properly conclude the
because
meeting,
of the
and
engagement
he
of
has also got a very
Professor
serious meeting to attend
Murtuja.
after this. That is
He will
why
be
we had to
available only
reschedule
at
the entire
1 p.m.
session.
So I request
I beg
everyone to
pardon
join once
before
again
all the
at
participants.
12:30
Thank you for
or 12
joining us now, and
by
kindly all of
12:40.
you please
So
get
thank you very
back
much.
by 12:45 so that we can be present for
CB
our
sir
second
also got
session with
disconnected.
Professor Murtuza.
We
So that is
sincerely
why
apologize
we
everyone
could
Thank
not
you. Thank you.
properly conclude the
Because
meeting,
of the
Thank you,
and
sir.
he has also
Thank you
got a
all.
very serious
Professor
meeting to
We are
attend after
getting
this.
into a
That is
break
why
right
we
now,
had to
and
reschedule the
I
entire
will be
session.
informing you all to
I beg
again
pardon
rejoin
before
the
all
meeting.
the participants. Thank you
Okay,
for
thank you
joining
for
us
now.
now, and kindly all of you please get back by 12:45 so that we can
I
be
would
present for
request
our second
everyone
session with
to
Professor
kindly
Murtuza.
exit
That is
from the
why
meeting for now.
we could
Thank
not
you. Thank you.
properly conclude the meeting,
Thank you,
and
sir.
he has also
Thank you
got a
all.
very serious meeting to
We are
attend after
getting
this.
into a
That
break
is
right
why
now,
we had to reschedule
and
the
I
entire
will be
session.
informing you all to
I beg
again
pardon
rejoin
before
the
all
meeting.
the participants. Thank you. Please get back by 12:45 so that we can
I
be
would
present for
request
our second
everyone
session with
to kindly
Professor Murtuza.
exit
That
from
is
the
why
meeting
we
for
could
now.
not properly conclude the meeting, and he has also please get back by 12:45 so that we can
I
be
would
present for
request
our second
everyone
session with
to kindly exit from the meeting for now.
Did I keep you all waiting?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much for gracing the occasion, sir.
No, that's my pleasure. Like, can you hear me all right?
Sir, we are waiting for Kusmita. Hello, Kusmita?
But can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The sound is okay, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll try to. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slides?
Sir, not slides are not visible, sir.
Okay. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, 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 sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, Sir Kusmita, perhaps she will join. Because of network, perhaps network problems, is not here. So
No,
let me start.
We still have 10 minutes, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did I keep you all waiting?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for gracing the occasion, sir.
No, that's my pleasure. Like, can you hear me all right?
Sir, we are waiting for Kusmita. Hello, Kusmita?
But can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The sound is okay, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll try to. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slides?
Sir, not slides are not visible, sir.
Okay. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, 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 sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, Sir Kusmita, perhaps
Sir, 1 minute,
join.
please.
Because
No
of network, perhaps
Okay,
network problems, is not here. So
No,
let me start.
We still have 10 minutes, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did I keep you all waiting?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much for gracing the occasion, sir.
No, that's my pleasure. Like, can you hear me all right?
Sir, we are waiting for Kusmita. Hello, Kusmita?
But can you
Participants are requested to keep their mics on mute, please.
sound is okay, right?
Madam Shikha Pathak, please mute your mic. Madam Shikha Pathak, please mute your mic.
Acha, Dr. Kusmita, have you joined? Dr. Kusmita?
Yes, sir.
Have you joined? No, you
Actually, sir,
joined.
I'm waiting for the other participants.
No, it's okay.
Hello,
okay.
sir.
Professor Murtuza
Yes,
has
sir.
joined. Yes.
Actually,
Yes.
it is a great honor and a privilege that Professor Murtuza has come among us. And as we know, He is a well-known academic. He is the Pro Vice Chancellor and Head of the Department of English and Humanities in the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. And it is our real honor that we have him with us today to speak on a subject of modernism, which is a really complex to understand subject for all the students. So I'm sure everyone who has joined this meet will be greatly benefited by sir's presentation. I would just beg for a few moments because we were scheduled to start at 1 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So that is why most of the candidates have not yet joined. So that is why I'm asking for a little more time.
Sure, no problem.
Okay, you take 2-3 minutes so that other participants can join.
So you can see my PowerPoint slides, right? I just want to make sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So Professor Chidananda was here in the morning. How did it go?
It was an absolute delight as usual, sir, to have him with us. Right. And he was speaking about not only modernism, he also enlightened us about 19th century literature, how enlightenment gave away to
No, he's an amazing scholar. Like I have deep respect for him.
To being that it, yes. Good. Unfortunately, he had to leave the meeting as he has another commitment to attend to. Otherwise, he would be here with us now in the second session.
Sure. So how much time do I have? Like,
Sir, you can continue up to 2:30.
Sir,
No problem.
there is no limit, sir. Absolutely.
okay, so
as per as you need, as per as you like. And there will be a few questions, of course, if you have the time to answer them. We would be very happy.
Okay.
There is a general announcement. I'm sorry, sir, I'm interrupting you. There is a general announcement for all the participants. The feedback link for both the sessions will be shared in the Google Meet, also in the WhatsApp group. So all of you are requested to fill in that feedback form within 10 p.m. today itself. In order to get the certificates, but please understand that it is a long and complex process. So please allow us a time of 15 days at least before we start dispersing the certificates. Thank you so much. And as we can see, 74 participants have already joined. Principal sir, what should we do?
Yes, you start. Hey, please. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Since it is getting late unnecessarily, I think we should not waste everybody's time. So before Professor Murtaza has to speak, I am feeling really nervous that I have to deliver an introductory speech about modernism, because what can I say before such a great academic? But let me try my bit. So when we think about modernism, we think about these varied movements of imagism, symbolism, and the importance and relevance of the stark and ruthless imagery that these poets used. And as C.V. sir rightly pointed out, Chidananda Bhattacharya sir, that Rabindranath Tagore was against this modernist spirit. He, however, did not like the likes of T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound, because he thought that they were making certain presumptions and assumptions. So they were actually demeaning the trivial. They were promoters of the ugly and commonplace. This was a kind of a workaholic kind of vision. So that is why, according to him, modernist poetry was rather stark and rather gruesome in comparison to the normal idea that we have about poetry, that it is a source of delight, that it is a heightened reality, it is a beautiful experience in which we can mesmerize ourselves. So, and also in modernist poetry, we see the use of hard-hitting language, which has been used by most modern poets. They have forsaken the traditional rhythms.
As modernism is also known as high modernism, and high modernism is guilty of looking for a kind of a transcendental meaning. So as if, so meaning is attainable, even though they were trying to make sense of the chaos and they were trying to make it new. But there are certain poets who believe that the project of modernism did not end with high modernism. So one particular offshoot is what we know as postmodernism. But for many, postmodernism is a kind of a misnomer, because what is after postmodernism? Is it going to be postmodernism? So to give a period term for an aesthetic trend could be problematic. So certain poets, critics, they prefer the term late modernist, because the avant-garde with which modernism started, the experimental poetics with which modernism started, it still continues, and it's better to call them late modernist rather than postmodernist. So the poets that I want to focus on today, I actually will focus on one particular poet, but I'll give you the background of this kind of poetry, which has come to be known as shamanic poetry. And the image that you see, so that's my book, published from Cambridge Scholars Publisher, based on my thesis that I worked while working at the University of London at Birkbeck College. And the cover image, that itself is considered one of the examples of modernist poetry. The image, so there is a headless figure, and there is a broken record, and there are some maybe Japanese, scrolls, like, so there are some musical notations, how the musical notations are becoming part of a language, and how language is leaving our familiar realm and becoming unfamiliar. So that sort of transition is part of the project of the shaman or the shamanic, because in order to be a shaman, I will get into it in a second. So you need to cross your familiar realm. You need to go to the other world, get some sort of esoteric knowledge, and then you need to return. So that's the basic idea of a shamanic idea. So I have prepared lecture. So what I will do is I'll probably read out, but feel free to stop me if you want to at any point of time. And I'll probably talk about 40 minutes and leave, or maybe 50 minutes and leave about roughly 10 minutes, because I have a class at, in your time, that would be 2:10. So I need to leave by 2. So yeah, so here it goes. Now, can you identify these figures? So these are all popular culture figures. Any response?
Yes, sir. These are absolutely recognizable figures, especially from Harry Potter series, as we can see. Professor Dumbledore is there.
Right. Then who
And
else?
also the goblin. The goblin is there.
Not Goblin. So this is from Star Wars, Yoda.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that then.
All right. And you have Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. And of course,
Yes.
Merlin is there because of the Arthurian sword. You can recognize Merlin, the magician. So yeah, it has become quite fashionable once again to talk about the shaman. As a category of the occult, figures of the shaman now enter popular imagination mainly through films and fictions. Gandalf in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Professor Dumbledore in Rowling's Harry Potter, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Yoda in George Lucas's Star Wars, or the Arthurian Merlin in Hollywood productions. So they are all considered to be shamans. This list speaks of the return of the shaman. Now, there are recent academic discussion to consider Shakespeare's Prospero, Milton's Satan, the French poet Arthur Rimbaud, and even the American rock artist Jim Morrison as shamans. There are even extreme assertions to claim that all actors are shamans because of their shape-shifting ability of assuming the other. Indeed, these extensions of the inventory suggest that the concept of shaman has taken a long flight from Mircea Eliade's original proposition of the North Siberian priest doctrine. In Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, published in 1964, Mircea Eliade mentions a shaman is a priest doctor, an inspirational religious practitioner found among various northern people of Asia. However, a similar role of shaman can be noticed in different indigenous people. The Oxford English Dictionary applies the term shaman to denote, I quote, a man or woman who is regarded as having direct access to and influence in the spirit world, which is usually manifested during a trance and empowers them to guide souls, cure illness. End of quote. Now, in his visionary flights or ecstatic seances, a shaman negotiates with the invisible aspects of reality, which he uses to understand the nature of the human, animal, and material existence in the world, as well as to heal or guide individuals or the whole society. A traditional shaman is expected to receive and possess spiritual knowledge, regulate daily activities like political, medical, scientific, and legal affairs, communicate with the gods through rituals and sacrifices. However, in its popular rendition, the shaman has become a catch-all term for a grand magician, an arch-wizard, a biblical prophet, a rebel, or a traditional medicine man. The shaman rises in tandem with the burgeoning interest in the occult. The occult, especially in visual media. Now, the appropriation of the occult, category by certain contemporary poets goes beyond this psychological interpretation as it invests in issues such as ideological politics, referentiality, and the representation to investigate the reemergence of the mystical and magical aspects of occult in a poetics that is strategically designed as shamanic. So the kind of modernist experiment that are aspects of occult in a poetics that is strategically designed as shamanic. So the kind of modernist experiment that I'm looking at, so they are the ones who are strategically using the idea of the occult, so to put it very simply. Now, although they share these ideas with writers of modernism, these poets come to a different conclusion about the implication of the sacred and the social aspects of the occult. Thus, the simultaneous growth of the occult and shaman demands a separation of the popular shamanism from the shamanic. So, all right. So this is what I'm going to do today. So in what follows, I shall first try to understand the rationality behind such an appropriation. Then I shall focus on the ongoing dialogue between the primitive and the modern that constitutes its contemporaneous, and finally exemplify the shamanic poetics through the works of a contemporary British poet, Brian Catlin. Now, historically, the occult has been linked to esoteric mystical knowledge unavailable in organized religion. In Renaissance England, the new Platonists and figures like John Dee brought the otherwise occult to the public attention, which found its expression in characters such as Edmund Spencer's Archimago, Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and Shakespeare's Prospero. With visible insistence on wit and rationality in the 17th and 18th centuries, and the concurrent spread of the Enlightenment, the occult soon found itself in the underground. There are hints of the return of the occult in the 19th century Gothic art, but it is not until early 20th century that the occult re-emerges in British poetry under the generic category of myth, especially through Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy, via William Butler Yeats, and later on through Ted Hughes's poetic myth. So we have return of the myth within the modernist framework, but interestingly, literary critics seemed more comfortable in identifying this occult in modernist poetry as a figurative mode rather than as a practice. Even within the practitioners of the literary occult, when it comes to explaining their work in relation to spiritual reality and esoteric materials, poets like Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Ted Hughes exude uncharacteristic fluctuations and inconsistency. So notable exceptions would be Robert Duncan and Allen Ginsberg. Ted Hughes, for instance, told BBC Radio 3 that the famous pikes in his poems are angels hanging in the aura of the creators, as if in Blake's Tiger. But then this is his quote, from an interview that he gave, and he says that I cut the mythical things out and left myself with the old South Yorkshire fish. So he thought of the pikes as angels, but he said that that would be too much for his readers, so he decided to present them as simple fish. Now, doubtfulness like this, leads Timothy Matterer, so to argue that, certain occultist writers, so you find, mythical elements in T.S. Eliot, in Yeats, Sylvia Plath, and Ted Hughes. So they use them, but they suspend neither belief nor disbelief, but believe in order to create. Now, this is the crunch. So this is exactly what I'm trying to attack. So the modernist, so they are not actually sure. So they're using mythical categories, but they're kind of half believer. So they're not even sure whether they actually believe in these myths or not. This is where the shamanic comes in, and I'm using the Frankfurt School to understand, so their attitude towards me. Now, a similar complacency informs the popular interest in the occult, which, according to Theodor Adorno, allows it to become institutionalized, objectified, and to a large extent socialized. In his thesis on occultism, Adorno finds that this reception of secondary superstitions, like the predictions of fortune tellers or horoscopes featured in daily newspapers, more problematic than occult experiences like witnessing of ghosts or telepathy, studied by psychologists as an event of the unconscious or the uncanny. For Adorno, the unquestioning acceptance of the occult is symptomatic of the artificial lifestyle in a highly consumerist culture and alienation in a capitalist society that has made us susceptible to this rather ubiquitous stimuli. We entertain and are entertained by the supposed iconic occult figures from the margin simply because they correspond to our psychological demands without requiring much reflection. End of quote. Now, the reemergence of the occult insinuates a degradation of both the sacred and the social. So the way it goes, why we subscribe to all these secondary superstitions like horoscopes. So according to Adorno, so this is symptomatic of a culture which is degraded in spirituality and also in its social forms. The implication of the occult, when mediated through its totality, goes beyond its conspicuous niche in the culture industry and lends an insight into the different tactics of ideological representation and repression. By the same token, the idolization of the occult figure, like that of a wizard or a shaman from an apparently remote, therefore safe past, can no longer be granted license to take control of mass consciousness. Now, no matter how much you like Professor Dumbledore or Gandalf. Now, according to Adorno, the passive consumption of the occult involves a lack of conceptual labor that can make an individual vulnerable to the irrationality imposed by different institutions. It simply allows authoritarian aspects of irrationality to grow even within the self-proclaimed enlightened rationality of modernity. This has been elaborated by Max Horkheimer and Adorno together in their Dialectics of Enlightenment. Now, Adorno posits, this is what Adorno says. So this is a long quote. So late bourgeoisie ideology has again made it what it was for pre-animism, a being in itself modeled on the social division of manual and intellectual labor, on the planned domination over the former. In the concept of mind in itself, consciousness has ontologically justified and perpetuated privilege by making it independent of the social principle by which it is constituted. Such ideology explodes in occultism. So Adorno identifies a kind of ideology behind the emergence of the occult. Now, in his later essay, Adorno expands two repressive aspects of ideology. Firstly, it promotes a sense of conformity and submissiveness in the masses, which is fermented by overwhelming production of commodities. Secondly, it manipulates public opinion so that thought inevitably becomes a commodity and language the means of promoting the commodity itself. Now, consequently, a mystified notion of immediate correspondence between word and thing is interpolated in order to form a systematic social illusion about reality, and that is myth. And art is presented as a fetish object for leisurely consumption. So again, think of Harry Potter. If you think of Harry Potter, Harry Potter is solving all the mysteries, and when you get to know, who Voldemort is, so the riddles are solved. So you're talking about magic, and at the same time, magic is presented as something rational. And ultimately, so J.K. Rowling is presenting these magical elements for our leisurely consumption. So what needs to be done is a total transformation is needed, of society is needed to redress the consciousness of the masses affected by the representation and repression of the secondary superstitions. Now, Adorno's own solution to this situation involves a psychiatric as well as socio-psychological response. So he's saying that because there is already a kind of sickness that you're so passive, like, you simply consume whatever is given to you, in order to attack that kind of schizophrenia that is out there. So you need a kind of a psychiatric as well as a socio-psychological response. So that's number one. And in order for art to be effective, and if you really want to write or produce art in a society that is already sick, so Adorno is in his aesthetic theory proposes the forging of a fetish against commodity fetishism. So you already have a commodity fetish going on. So maybe the new form of art that is required to counter this commodity fetish, so there has to be another kind of fetish being built. So that brings me to the shamanic poets. So the kind of poets that I am interested in. So following the same logic, so some of the contemporary modernist, late modernist poets, as I mentioned earlier, radical poets, so they find it necessary to use occult elements like that of shamanism, rather the sublime form of superstition, to critique the dominance of instrumental reason, which does not exclude myth. Now, these radical occult from its aesthetic practice, as it will leave the problems of psychosocial consciousness in history unattended. Now, a return to the past at the same time cannot be a return to the pre-modern that the new romantics pursued in the mid-20th century. They are equally aware of the danger of remythologizing the present as a cover-up by making use of transcendental vision that was promoted by writers of high modernism. As a strategy, these radical poets proposed a recategorization of mythic rationality that would ultimately become a step towards demytholization. In other words, contemporary radical poets engage with mythic categories used by writers of modernism, but arrive at opposite conclusions about the nature and scope of myth. Broadly speaking, this attitude towards myth distinguishes these poets from the voguish postmodernist and situate them as late modernist in the sense of continuing critically the project of modernism. The poets under consideration do not declare modernism dead, but attempt to heal it by injecting entropic energy that has traditionally been considered marginal. Like the avant-gardists before them, they resist the idea that art can be owned by the bourgeoisie or shown in bourgeoisie institutions as a means to temporarily escape the material constraints and contradictions of everyday life. So they demonstrate a deeper social and political commitment to critique as well as a sharper strategic representation to expose the social modes and political conventions. Their poetic is essentially curative and is in search of an alternative mode of expression. Now, the therapeutic concern of one group of poets belonging to the late modernist avant-garde tradition brings them close to a shamanic purpose. They resist the sense of conformity and submissiveness that has developed within late capitalism as a sign of psychosocial sickness. The shamanic draws its strength from archaic forms of shamanism. A note of caution though, now while these poets put recognizable emphasis on certain ideas which can be indicated as shamanic, they have never identified themselves as a particular group or school. So they all belong to the underground poetic scene, which is known as British Poetry Revival. So the term is actually, I have given them the term, but even though they have used it, so in a scattered fashion. So I have used the modifier shamanic instead of shamanism to describe the system that inform a radical poetic practice, oppose commodity fetishism, and indulge in various experiments in art with an urgency of social change. Right. Now, this man whom you can you see the slide?
Yes, sir, we can see the slide.
Okay, so the artist here, so he's known for his installation art, Joseph Beuys. He's the German avant-garde artist, and he is a self-proclaimed shaman. And that you see in which he actually came to America from Germany on a plane, and he took an ambulance from the airport, went straight to coyote is the prairie dog, so the native animal. So he spent 7 days with a coyote and went back to America. And the title of his installation was I Love America, America Loves Me. So basically, he said that he had nothing to do with contemporary America. So he just wanted to meet the real America, which is represented by the coyote here. So this is, Joseph Beuys. So the German avant-garde artist and self-proclaimed shaman, Joseph Beuys, was one of the forerunners in linking contemporary art with the shamanic. So the poets that I am interested in, so they were heavily influenced by the works of Joseph Beuys. So he used the homeopathic doctrine of likeness, so similia similibus curantur, or bishe bish khoi, so literally meaning like cures like, to explain his shamanic defiance against Nazi fascism. Beuys, of course, was a member of the German Air Force during the Second World War, and several of his works exploit this homeopathic rationality as a way to come to terms with the Nazi consciousness. Now, one of his great work is tallow, which is used with animal fats to show energy in everywhere. So he uses lots of animal fats, like tons of whale fat, so and put it on a certain place just to give it energy. So things like that. On the other hand, James George Fraser is one of the scholars to detect the presence of the law of similarity in primitive societies. In sympathetic magic, such as voodoo, where resemblance entails magical connection, the effect is said to resemble the cause. Piers Vitebsky, so he studied the Peruvian tribe, so he also exemplifies this similar idea. Now, among the Sora tribe, the cause of illness or misfortune is always attributed to the magical darts of an aggressor. Now, hence, a cure can be effected only by a shaman who possesses an identical kind of dart to that used by the aggressor. So if you're injured by an arrow, so the shaman has to have a similar arrow to counter that magic. So that's the belief in the Peruvian shamans. Now, in now famous essay, The Uncanny, Freud holds the association of ideas as a link between the vocation of art, vocation of an artist, and the magic of a shaman. Now, in sympathetic magic, for example, if a carven shape of an individual is damaged, it goes on to damage the real individual. So you all know about voodoo magic, like you have a doll, and if you puncture the doll, so the real person will be affected. So similarly, through placing an anointed knife, and now if you put an anointed medicine on that injury, so the actual person will also be healed. Now, a wound of the individual can be treated. So in this type of association of ideas, so Freud identifies two principles, similarity, as in the carving, and contiguity, which is the weapon itself. So in literary art, the principles would be termed as metaphor and metonymy. So the artist is thus linked to the shaman and the magic with the literary technique. Right? So now the notion of illness and mutual recognition for therapeutic healing constitutes the meeting ground for both the contemporary poets under study and the ethnographic shaman. In shamanism are archaic techniques of ecstasy. Mircea Eliade, for example, posits that shamans cannot be regarded as merely sick. Their psychopathic experience has a theoretical content. For if they have cured themselves and are able to cure others, it is because they know the mechanics, or rather the theory of illness. So this is basically what Eliade says, that this is how shamans cure. Now this idea has influenced Ian Sinclair, one of the contemporary British novelist and one of the shamanic poets. He is the one actually who wrote the manifesto for shamanic poetry. So Sinclair, he was writing a catalog for Brian Catling, so the poet performer that I'm going to discuss today. So he wrote the catalog, and which is titled The Shamanism of Intent, and in which Sinclair declared that a marginal group of contemporary artists, poets, musicians, painters could be regarded as disinherited shaman. He observes that shaman volunteers for a sickness to seek help from the other than human and heal his community. So using Eliade's idea, so Sinclair is saying that, so some of the poets, because they are trying to address the commodity fetish, and they have incorporated a type of fetish in themselves, they themselves are trying to be sick, or willingly they have the intent of being sick in order to portray the sickness of the society, right? So that makes him call his colleagues as shamans of intent. So Ian Sinclair found Eliade's claim relevant in his depiction of the growing trend among some of his fellow poets and artists. So this is this article that he wrote for the catalog was later included in his book, Lights Out for the Territory. And this essay, like, so it's a long quote, but this is the Shamanic Manifesto. So in order to understand what I mean by the shamanic, so this is basically Sinclair's explanation. So Sinclair is saying, certain artists began to look strange. Their behavior, this remorseless pursuit of discomfort, this restless and fruitful irritation struck me as exemplary. The will to continue, improvise upon chaos. So there's chaos everywhere and they want to improvise upon chaos, could be defined as intent, a sickness vocation. So just like a traditional shaman himself would be sick in order to treat his patients, so he would, like, so drink the poison in order to take the poison out of a patient. So this is an intent, a sickness vocation, as Eliade has it, an elective trauma. So this is a key word. It is an elective trauma. So the poet or the performer or the poet shaman, so they elect to have that traumatic experience. The health of the city, perhaps of the culture itself, seemed to depend on the flights of redemption these disinherited shamans could summon and sustain. They were associated in mind with the avatars of unwisdom, scavengers, dole-queue antiquarians, back people, outpatients, muggers, victims, millennium babblers. So basically, Sinclair is saying that these are not your mainstream poets. So this is not Eliade, this is not Yeats, So they are the avatars of unwisdom. So they do not pretend to have wisdom. So they're scavengers. So they're scattered all over the place. So we are actually looking at the underground scene and the experimental poetry that is published in small presses, so in chapbooks, little magazines, and so on. So they are not part of the mainstream. So that's what Sinclair is saying, and this is where the real intent is. This is where the sickness vocation is. So Sinclair's manifesto hence celebrates the outsider status of shamanic poetry and hails it as a significant marker of British culture. He posits artists so stubborn, so ruinously estranged from the tribe, that their outcast status was something more useful than a disguise, a horn mask. Is it too preposterous to think of this delusion that work is capable of re-enchanting place as a reality, a significant marker of our culture? So Sinclair basically saying that, so you need to re-enchant the place, right? So you need to magically engage with the place. And Sinclair, but I'm not going to discuss Sinclair today, but his method of writing poetry is known as, also fiction, is known as psychogeography. So he is interested in the memory of place, all right? So about what might be considered as shamanic. These poets are varied in their ideas and language, and none of the poets is interested in attaching the label of shamanism to define their work, possibly to avoid the trap of being labeled in a fetishistic way. So why they do not use the term shamanic? Because they're trying to resist fetishism, and if you in a way incorporate one label or one tag, so doing yourself a disservice. Okay, so these poets believe that they're forced to transport to another world because of a bird mother, who is no other. So let me move on. So he's saying that these are the residue of her waking nightmare. Now, this is sorry, I typed it twice, but the idea that why do you think this is the nightmare of someone? So because they are outsiders and they're not conforming to the mainstream, proved by the authority. And so writing in the 80s and late 70s. So this is actually Margaret Thatcher. So the nightmare, so the poets, these poets are actually a nightmare for the Prime Minister herself, who, in a way, so reduced funding for Art Council, because Margaret Thatcher, because of her open market economy and capitalist outlook, so she stopped patronizing art and culture. So these poets suddenly felt that, so you are living in a system which has no place for art and culture, and you need to respond to that. And so when they were babbling and making all this chaotic noise, so they are the disinherited shamans. So they have lost their heritage, right? So the idea that Margaret Thatcher could be a bird mother, it goes to again back to Mircea Eliade's idea that in order for a shaman, so a shaman needs to go through a rite of passage. So how do you get that esoteric secret knowledge? So usually a spirit figure, like a bird figure, would come to a shaman, visit a shaman after he has gone through fasting and other rituals. And this bird mother, natural figure, will take the soul of the shaman to return the soul to the shaman, and that will give him the power to heal others. Right? So this is from Mircea Eliade's idea. So this is bird mother, and I'm sure you have seen that woman, who gives life back to the heroine, right? So for these poets, Thatcher, so they are forced to go to the other world. So the change, the transformation, the metamorphosis, whatever you call it, so this is due to Margaret. So look how Margaret Thatcher is described by Ian Sinclair in Lights Out for the Territory. So she says, necklace of skulls in her yellowing equine teeth, returns from the battlefield, some lost bog in the South Atlantic, ordering the tribe to rejoice. Now this was going on in the South Atlantic. England was trying to assert its military might, involved in a fight with Argentina.
Sand, electricity, veined in tar shine. Speaking this chiseled wedge, sight turns citric and peering in the active dark to copy a moon. Yellow on its back, but dragged up standing, throat knotted to a glass, full choke and snub nose, without a true word to say or beg. Your purchased concentration is matched in this whisper, leaning. It is spat out of avoidance and might just match a nub.
So this is just to give you an idea how the shaman works. And this is, so Brian Catling's probably most signature poem that has been anthologized in many anthologies, called the Stumbling Block. All right. So Sinclair calls Brian Catling English Boyce. So just like Joseph Boyce was performing, so you can see that he was performing as a Cyclops. So you all know Cyclops. So I'll not get into that. But the stumbling block. So this is a very interesting. I will talk about the Cyclops in a second. But before I do that, so this is his poem, and this is his book, and he crafted it. He made it with leather and wood and all that. So what is going on here? So Catling, so in his series of performance that accompany his Cyclops poem, poses as the epic victim of a hero-worshipping culture in the shape of a disfigured, one-eyed man or one-eyed monster, blinded by an intruder, Ulysses. In all these instances, the shamanic exists on the border of homogeneous societies or cultures that insist on order through conformity and adherence to prescribed rules. Metropolitan London, classical Greece, continental Europe, for that matter. Now, the stumbling block, its index, is probably Catling's most influential work, with its inherent desire to transgress artistic form. Catling defies the generic imposition not only by erecting the stumbling block as a sculpture in an exhibition, but also by embedding it as a poem that contains and generates its own special structure within a regular verse form. Apparently, this prose poem seems to bridge his two separate identities of poet and artist. The hybrid work is a strategic confrontation of tangible substance and intangible ideas. Its existence in both 3-dimension and 2-dimension redefines what we deem as sculptural space. Catling introduces the stumbling block as an direct attempt to write sculpture, to focus on an invisible shape-shifting mass, to try to see its contours, its material, its volume, in the different light of its manifestation. The poem as a scripted sculpture informs Catling's fascination with language, the spatial materiality of his works, and his treatment of writing as a strategy to produce and enhance conceptual resonance. Moving on. Right. So in an interview, Catling says, one of the problems I have with sculpture is that there is tremendous amount of fundamentalism about, and I don't believe in sculpture. I don't believe in writing. I'm not interested in proclamations that the clinical manipulation of any language is any greater than the idea or than what may come about unexpectedly. Now, Catling's emphasis on conceptual timbre brings him close to the idea of vortex, advanced by both Ezra Pound and Wyndham Lewis. Accordingly, the stumbling block acts as a site of generative force, where we encounter a whirlpool of ideas. The title makes a direct reference to the Bible, momentarily opening up possibility for a hermetic discourse. But the idea gets soon entangled in a series of Gnostic references and occult rationality mentioned in the text. Catling situates himself on the juncture of time from where both past and future can be made visible. As in his other works, he stretches the limit of knowledge in order to present an unforetold reality in an apocalyptic tone. The apocalypse for Catling is not a millennial hype, it is an acknowledgement of beginning of the end that he manifests by self-annihilation. He makes apocalypse visible by using the body of the text and the physical body of the performer. Thus, Catling's urge to mutate the art form finds a parallel in the way he disfigures his own body in his performance. The bulging stomach in Luna Prayer, so you can see it here, so he's holding the moon. So the Gloucester-like bleeding eyes in the blindings, the mirror-attached formation of one eye in the Cyclops can be cited as some of the examples of Catling's manipulation of the body. His bodily disfiguration in performance is savage and brutal. Like the other shamanic poet J.H. Breen, he is not responding to the wound, he is exposing it. Like Sinclair, he is not trying to write history by giving names of streets and cities. He is trying to capture the shape-shifting of time and space. Thus, his performative works become a mirror image of the social illness, while his poetry as text constantly refers back to his other tropes, creating a set of intermediate connections. His bodily disfigurement can be explained as a sickness vocation, and his apocalyptic concerns can be seen as a desire to travel in time and view what lies ahead. These ideas of simulation of sickness, as in heterology, Bataille's heterology, and traveling across time to see beyond boundaries and to see through mystery make Catling a shamanic poet. Catling's ritualistic performance involve an elective trauma as he invokes energy that is not available to him in a society that suffers from compulsive consumption and materialistic indulgence, for example. All right, so I'll just move on. So for this, so Sinclair, so when you are dealing with myth, and Sinclair says that Catling is the English voice, and he even goes under the saying that, how can you colonize the myth, so coming from ancient Greece and others. So for Sinclair, this is a colonization of the most intimate kind. It is a possession that demands an absolute sacrifice of self. So why are you disfiguring yourself? So why are you doing? So I cannot go into detail. I actually had a reading of the entire poem, but unfortunately I cannot do it because I have another commitment. So I will actually go towards the end. So I've shown you the video. So this is how the Cyclops myth started for Brian Catling. So Catling was visiting British Library, and one day, so when he was moving from one shelf to another, so he just saw that, so two of his eyeballs have merged in one of the mirrors, and immediately he thought that he was Cyclops. And so Hunterian Museum, sorry, not British Museum. So he just felt that Ulysses, so has blinded Cyclops in one of the islands, and he has returned to Europe, and now the Cyclops has come back to haunt the European imagination. So that basically started the whole Cyclops series. So he started, locating Cyclops in different part of Europe. So in his Leipzig performance, so he went to Germany, and so he tried to look at the Second World War museum and the Holocaust memories and all that, and he tried to understand the monstrous presence of the Cyclops in Europe. Okay, and he actually wrote 9 tracts of Cyclops. And when you look at the use of the word tracts, so this is where when I said this is genre breaking. So shamanic poetry is very difficult because you cannot locate it in one genre. So tract, the word tract can mean from traction, so if I have back pain and I need traction. So tract can means to pull of the eye as among civilized men as inexplicable. So he thinks of an extreme scenario in which Buñuel's film depicts a sharp razor cutting through the dazzling eye of a young, charming woman. Now, especially in his video film, Antique, Catling puts a 50-pence coin through a slit into the eye of a woman before having a glimpse of memory. This violation of the issue of audience and commodification of art. Physically, a wounded artist can offer temporary resistance season in the poem. Catling's intention, however, reminds us of its invisible visibility in the realm of heterology, where the monotheist God too exists. While homogeneous society takes comfort under the watchful eye of a monotheist God, the eye of Cyclops seeks of violence, retribution, intrigue, and sex. So this idea of, I present Catling as a poet shaman to understand his wild behavior and pitched into chaos. I have tried to explain how Catling breaks up the symbolic order. This is my supervisor, Professor William Rowe, who claims that the experimental shamanic poetry questions the totality of the symbolic. The figure of the shaman in contemporary British poetry breaks into the coded chaos of an advanced capitalist society while looking for an alternative parallel in the pagan world of the shaman that manifests a conducted chaos. The two-dimensional Angelus Novus in Paul Klee's painting, suspended in a void between the cloud and the debris that cannot be distinguishable from one another, offers as a handle to locate the shamanic, which is caught between past and present, capitalism and paganism, rationality and irrationality, chaos and cosmos, sacred and profane, and so on. Contemporary shamanic poets, like Klee's angel here, must undertake a flight, and the option before them is to fly away or to fly into the cloud or the debris. In either way, the shamanic flight must be informed by a conscious decision rather than intent in Sinclair's terms, to adopt a technique that engages with a range of epistemological issues. Passivity, in this context, is not an option. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
sir.
sir, for your kind lecture.
Thank you very much, sir, for your for giving us precious time.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Thank you, Kusmita. So I hope, I made sense, even though I tried to cover a lot of things. And yeah, so
it was a very eye-opening kind of a lecture. We have always heard of the shaman as the magician, as the person who lives on the margins of society, as the person who dapples in the occult. But to reinterpret it and see it through the mirror of society, how commodity fetishism has been re-examined, and how shamanism actually engages in examining ideologic poetics. This is a new insight that we have got from you, sir. Thank you so much for delivering your lecture. And there was so much information to process.
Yes.
I could barely get down to everything.
Yeah, of course, this is my PhD thesis, so I had a lot of time to think about it. So yes, and it was very, these are not things that we normally talk about in this part of the world. And when I started my PhD, on my first meeting, my professor said, you're going to write 100,000 words, and nowhere in your PhD, I want to see the word creator, creativity, creation. And I was surprised, how can you talk about poetry without being creative? And it took me almost 2 years to understand what he actually meant, because the poets that I worked, so I had to call them technician. So I did not call them poet. So even though in this presentation, I use the word poet, but in my thesis, I call them technician of the sacred and the technician of the social, because they were using this technique, as a strategy to deal with the social illness. So, and of course, as you have seen that, so this is like, Sinclair, when I was talking about Sinclair and Catlin, so they are different. Like, so one of the poets I looked on was Maggie Sullivan, and Maggie Sullivan uses, like in one of her poems, uses the ultrasound of a womb to write poetry. So to go beyond patriarchal language, so she uses the sound of the fetus, to write poetry. So as I just said, like, it took me simply 2 years to understand the basic idea of shamanism. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Madam, please deliver your lecture. Okay. Thank you, Kusumita Madam. A warm and graceful afternoon to all our esteemed speakers and participants. It is my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks speech and acknowledge the contribution of all those who worked hard to make the webinar happen. On behalf of Rajganj College, I extend a really hearty vote of thanks to our chief guests, Professor Chidananda Bhattacharya, who was the speaker in the first session, though he is not here right now, and Professor Samsad Mortuja, who spared time from their busiest schedule to grace the occasion. Thank you, respected sirs, for sharing your work and knowledge with us, your opinion, and finding the precious time for all. Thank you, dear all esteemed participants, for your cooperation and patience all through the webinar. Thank you so much. Further, I'm immensely thankful to our principal, sir, Dr. Hara Prasad Mishra, for his effort towards and cooperation in organizing the webinar. A special mention and thanks to our convener, Dr. Kusumita Mukherjee Devnath, Assistant Professor of English, for our efforts towards anchoring the whole program. And our technical coordinator, Sri Dipankar Devnath, librarian, Rajganj College, without whose technical coordination, this program would have not been a success. Lastly, a big thanks to each one of you who made this webinar happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you to all participants.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. And with this, we hope to engage in further insightful sessions in future. And hope this is not the end, but just the beginning of our journey, where we get to learn many new things like we did today. And I also would like to extend a very warm thank you to Professor Murtaza for agreeing to participate today in spite of your tough schedule. I'm sorry, sir, I bothered you so much with so many SMSs and WhatsApps. I just kept harassing you. I'm sorry for all that. And thank you most sincerely to our principal, sir, for hosting this event. Thank you to our IQAC coordinator, Alka Muktan madam, and obviously a very big thank you to our librarian, sir, Deepak Devnath, sir, has kindly agreed to be the technical coordinator for this webinar.